I'm going to demo doing the moccasin pattern here. So you want to have a pen or a pencil with not too thick a tip. Generally speaking, you want to hold your marker vertical, because if you're holding at an angle, you're actually undercutting where the foot lays. So you want to hold it vertical against the foot and just trace around, and sometimes it tickles a little bit.
Clearly I want to do it, but
it does tickle. So you would be careful to actually capture the shape of each toe.
Yeah, but then we're going to modify the foot a lot. So this is just the tracing, not actually the pattern making. The pattern making is what you do to the tracing of your foot.
And do you make note of where the arch is, like how high?
No. I mean, the tracing kind of incorporates that. Okay, that's good. And now you want to find the midline of the foot, and this is kind of subjective, you know, just the best job you can do of getting a line that goes straight right through the middle of the foot, and usually it's going to end up around the second toe. So just like most of the meat, you know, like if you were into geometry and math, you could, you know, calculate how much area, but obviously none of us are going to do that because that would just be ridiculous. So you just eyeball it and do the best you can. It's
I wanted to do that.
If you feel so inspired, by all means.
Better get out my calculator.
And then you actually want it to extend back past the heel a couple of inches. Let's see how I did. Move it over a little bit. So ideally up above the toes and back here. Okay, so this outer line is going to be my midline. And so now I'm going to look at the height of the big toe, and I'm going to transfer, I'm going to turn this around. So I'm going to transfer the height of the big toe to this line on the midline. So like there. Now this is counterintuitive, but I'm gonna mark the widest part of the foot on either side, so that's kind of the ball of the foot. And now I'm gonna round between this line that's the height of her toe and each of these wide points, and I'm gonna go ahead and just cut her toe right off with that line. So this is really key to this pattern. This pattern is specific to brain tanned buckskin. So as we cut the toe off, we're making it so that the buckskin is going to stretch to accommodate the shape of her foot. So if you were to do this with another leather that didn't move and give, like buckskin, it wouldn't do this. If you don't do this with brain tan, then it's going to stretch and it's going to end up like wrapping around the foot and being loose and floppy and not wearing right. So this part is key to getting it to stretch just so that it fits the foot in the long term. Again, it's going to be a little uncomfortably tight when it's first worn. And so I'm doing the same thing on either side. So you can see I'm not really removing area ultimately because I'm adding in a little bit area over here. I'm just shifting the shape of it. So now the foot's going to get in there and kind of expand the buckskin both sides. And then I'm going to extend this line down parallel to, or best I can do, parallel. This is fun. Often I have a straight edge and a real pencil, so this is a fun little additional challenge here. So extend back parallel to the midline, back to usually just an inch or two back behind the heel. So that's my basic form, and now I want to add some flair to this, and that is what, can you hand me? So that's what's going to bring this line up. Adding a little flare to the back brings my seam line up and makes the little heel cup. So now I'm going to come back to an inch or two, so I'm going to make a line like 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Usually I go for around 2 inches behind the heel, and I'm going to expand this line about 1/3 of an inch on either side, and then connect these points again. And I'm going to have to resharpen my little pan. It's working great though. It's soft.
So cute.
Yeah. So add that bit of flair. And then, so that's my basic pattern. And now the final step is adding a seam allowance. And that is going to be basically about the width of a welt. So that's usually like 1/3 of an inch or so. So I'm just going to go around the outside, and I'm going to be consistent all the way around the outside, but not behind the heel, because this is further than the heel needs to be, just so we have enough extra to really pinch it and make sure we get a good fit. And then we'll use that extra for the welt in the back. A little bit big here. I like to try to keep the seam allowance and the welt as small as possible, because the bigger it is, then the more of a ridge is going to be pointing in at your foot. And they can be a little uncomfortable when you first wear them, because one, they're tight, and two, they do have this ridge. And that's why I was saying the smaller your stitches, the more comfortable. So see how that ridge is pretty minimal compared to the ridge on that one? You're going to feel that. It's going to make a difference. So if you make it wider, then you're probably going to end up needing to trim it, and that's going to kind of change the sizing a bit. So go small seams and stitches is far more comfy. So that's the basic pattern. And so then I would label this Jeannie. So when you're looking at the stitching or at the writing, you're cutting the sole if you have the membrane side up. Which is kind of intuitive, because that's the way you'd be stepping on it, right? And then you flip it, and when you have the blank side up, that's when you're cutting your upper. So you're going to cut the sole in the thick, tough parts of the hide, and the upper can be in, you know, medium thick hide. You don't want it to be like in the armpit or the belly or the super flexible stuff, but basically the upper is just kind of holding the sole to your foot, right? So it doesn't have to be super strong. It's not taking any abrasion or anything. So yeah, so you can move that around according to your needs of the hide.
And they're two separate panels. It's not like
they're two separate pieces. They're not folded. Okay. Yeah.
And when you start sewing, do you sew from the toe down on either side?
Yes, great question. So we did this in the bags class, where we were trying to line up the corners of the bag, because if you start down here, the chances are really good, especially if you're doing thicker hide for the sole and thinner for the upper. The thinner one is probably going to stretch more, so if you started here, by the time you get up to here, they'd probably be all cockeyed from one another, and you can't fix that. You'd have to go back and totally redo the stitching. So instead, you bring them together, you're sewing them inside out, so membrane surfaces out. You start from the toe, and then I work down a couple inches this way, and just like Jeannie's doing, and then a couple inches this way, and then a couple this way, and then a couple this way, and that keeps it all nicely lined up as you get down to here.
And then at what point do you stop and measure your toe? I mean, measure the heel and all that?
Once you get the stitching far enough down that you, I mean, basically, you'd stop around to where your heel is, but you're gonna need to stitch more than that. So I usually go an inch or so behind, and then you end up cutting up the midline of the upper, and you're cutting just a little bit at a time, because again, you want them to be tight, so you don't want that hole any bigger than it has to be to get your foot in, because it's gonna stretch out. So you cut it and keep trying to cut it just like a quarter, half an inch at a time. You cut up to here and it's fine. Then this part, you just get a little bit of it at a time. Keep trying it on until you can get your toes all the way to the end. And then once you can get your toes up to the end, then you stop cutting, and then you cut across. So usually it ends up being, you know, right about where your foot starts really coming up into the ankle. So it ends up being about there. So you just do like a quarter inch out on either side, and that's what gives you these little tabs there. So it's a little T cut like that. And, you know, trying like one of these, this one fits better than this one, because this one I cut a little off from center. So they always kind of, like I end up stepping on this a little bit more, as you can kind of see from the wear, and in this that didn't happen. So it makes a difference to be careful with your cutting. Yeah, and then once you've got the the upper on and you know your lines cut, then you draw these together and mark it, and you just sew a straight line up. You don't have to do cupping for the heel, and you can see it just kind of like folds in and rounds itself without you having to worry about it. If you try to round it, you'll end up stepping on these stitches, which isn't ideal. So yeah, you just sew, mark, and sew up the back, and then I like to leave the end of my welt a little long, so I have a little pull tab to help me get them on and off. So that's kind of just a convenience.